This was my first ever PAX West, and I had a great time. I usually go to PAX East, so this was a nice change of pace for me. Not only is the physical layout different, where PAX East is in one big building and PAX West is spread out between 3 buildings in downtown Seattle, but the overall vibe was also a lot different as well. There were a lot more AAA games at PAX West, and I'm sure that's just because of proximity and the West Coast. But it gave me the unique opportunity to try out some great games, both AAA and indie as well, so that I can talk to you about them here. And if you're new here, my name is Dan. Welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk your ear off about video games. And today we're just gonna unpack a bunch of the games that I enjoyed from PAX West 2025. So the very first thing I did when I got to PAX West was go check out PRAGMATA. As soon as I got there, I ran to that line. And overall, the Capcom booth was probably the busiest booth in PAX West in general, so I was really lucky to get there in time to try the game within the first hour or so. PRAGMATA, if you're not aware, is a third-person action game which people seem to think is a secret Mega Man game. I think that's simply because there's a little girl dressed in all blue who seems to be a robot kid who fires lasers out of her hand. And obviously that sounds a lot like a Mega Man game, but Capcom has sworn up and down that it's not a secret Mega Man game, and so far, I think I believe them. In any case, I thought that PRAGMATA's actual gameplay was really interesting. You primarily control this dude in a big suit of armor, and on his back is that robot girl I mentioned earlier. So the guy can fire his gun, and that's all great and good, but lots of the enemies are robots that need to be hacked before they're vulnerable. And that's where the robot girl comes in. So what happens is you'll get your reticle onto an enemy, and then a little hacking mini game shows up. You use the face buttons on your controller to move the hacking mini game's cursor around, and what I found cool about this is that eventually you'll get certain tiles that change up the hacking mini game, which apply different buffs or debuffs depending on what you get. So once you successfully complete this hacking mini game, which is very quick by the way, the enemy is now vulnerable and you can attack them for full damage for a short period of time. And on top of this unique take on combat, PRAGMATA also features some pretty interesting puzzles. Now mind you, this is all based on a demo that I played, which is only a half hour of the game, if that. I think I was able to restart the demo and get pretty far on my second playthrough while standing there, all within the window of 30 minutes. So the combat could change by the time this game releases, and I'm sure there's way more puzzles as well. But just based on that short amount of time, I'm already quite excited to see what else this game has to offer, how they're going to change up the gameplay with those hacks that I mentioned earlier. And honestly, I am hoping that this is a secret Mega Man game, because there hasn't been any movement on that franchise in a long time. Capcom, I just want Mega Man X. I just want a cool, good Mega Man. I'm sorry. We're moving on to the next game. And with that, let's talk about a 2D platformer called TetherGeist. Now this game was among a bunch of games that like to keep leaderboards for people who would run speedruns on their demos. Not only is that a genius way to get people to come back and play your game more, but it was really fun to try to get the next fastest score. I was not one of those people, but I will say that my first time through the demo took about 10 minutes, and my second time took about 4 minutes. So all of that is to say that TetherGeist is the kind of game that once you get it, you start to flow through it a lot faster. And the actual gameplay consists of your character picking up different power-ups that allows them to shift around the stage depending on what power-up they got. Sometimes your power-up will allow you to move through walls, other times it'll be a really fast dash move. And stringing all of these different moves together depends on which order you picked up the power-ups. And since they all have different effects, it's up to you to decide which ones you pick up in which order, that then allow you to string together different movement patterns. The game makes a lot more sense when you're playing it, and that's good because there's a demo on Steam right now, but like I said earlier, once it clicks, it feels really good to move through. And as we move through all these games, just make sure you check my description below, because there's going to be links not only to the games that I've talked about, but to the PAX West 2025 directory on Steam of other games that might have been at the show that I just didn't discuss. Next up, we're going to jump back into the AAA space when we talk about a game called Borderlands 4. Have you ever heard of the Borderlands series? I'm assuming you have, but just in case you haven't, Borderlands is probably one of the original looter shooters where you run around an area, it's a first-person shooter, you pick up weapons all the time, you're changing out your gear all the time, and you're upgrading your arsenal as you go. And Borderlands in particular is known for being really crass, funny, and awesome, but Borderlands 3 didn't have exactly the same punch as Borderlands 2. So fans are currently wanting from that series. Now, they weren't completely let down. Borderlands 3 had some pretty solid gameplay, lots of different combinations that made for some interesting builds. But now I'm looking forward to Borderlands 4 not only to give me a more technical and interesting version of Borderlands, but a story that I can get into as well. With all that being said, all I can really speak to is the character that I played as and the combat that I took part in the demo. And while this was obviously a first-person shooter, true to the Borderlands formula, some of the fights were actually pretty interesting. One thing that stood out to me the most was a boss fight that involved me shooting certain nodes on a boss, and I had to use a melee grapple to expose those nodes. Those were the weak spots. And then when the boss would go into this cocoon-like state, I had to avoid the floor because now it is just acid, so there's a platforming puzzle to avoid that. So it was nice to be a little more strategic in a Borderlands game, not only against this boss, but also regular enemies as well. At least in the demo, you couldn't just run into an area guns blazing and hoping to win. You actually had to pay attention to what it took to take each enemy down. And that game's coming out really soon, if I'm not mistaken, so let me know how it is in the comments if you've played it already. And now we're going to talk about not one, but two creepy, spooky games. And one is arguably much creepier and spookier than the other, so let's talk about that one first, and the game is called Love Eternal. Now, we did speak about this game during the PAX East 2025 video, but I didn't play it back then. I was just excited about the game, but this time I got ahead of things and I actually made an appointment with Yearsbird Games, who's publishing the game, and I finally played the demo, so let's talk about it. Love Eternal is a precision platformer, but it's also a psychological horror game. And you wouldn't know that if you look at it because it looks kind of scary, but it's really simple. You've got these simple pixel graphics, really easy to look at. The pixel art can be kind of weird in certain places, but overall it looks sort of unassuming, like any other pixelated platformer you've seen. But it's the storytelling and the sound design that are going to set this game apart and have it lean harder into that horror element. Now, I'm not typically somebody who looks for horror games. I don't love being scared because sometimes that stuff sticks with me, and then right before I go to sleep, I'll hear something creepy that I played in the video game, and then I can't sleep for 2 hours. And I'm almost certain that that's going to be the case for Love Eternal because this game's sound design really hit home. And I was in the convention hall playing this game, and I was still able to clock that the audio design is just a little weird in the best way possible. You play as a girl navigating her memories in this weird psychological horror platformer thriller, and I think this is going to be a great chance for both the horror community, which really loves its games, and the platformer community, which also really loves its games, to come together and get really weirded out by this also very fun to play platformer. Now, the other game in this weird, scary combo is a much less weird game called Demonschool. It's a slice of life tactical RPG where you play as a girl who's attending a demon school. Now, at this school, the students study the paranormal, but there's lots of weird things afoot. So it's up to your character, who happens to be the last survivor in a line of demon hunters, to figure things out. But along the way, she's gonna make friends, she's gonna go to classes, she's gonna spend her time doing things, and it's going to affect the way the team composition comes together. Now, the actual tactical combat I found very approachable, and I think that's a good sign because I typically am decent at tactical games, but they don't usually click for me right away. And I think one of the reasons this game was more digestible than most tactics games is the fact that it uses very small numbers to do its calculations. And something about these little numbers made it really easy for me to predict what would happen next in combat, and that's good because that's exactly how you're supposed to be playing tactical RPGs. So now we're not only going to jump back into the AAA pool, but we're also going to talk about yet another of Capcom's games. They had 3 games at PAX West this year, so we're going to talk about all 3, and this is the second one. It's Onimusha, Way of the Sword. Now, I said earlier that I don't really love spooky, scary games because they make me all scared and stuff at nighttime, but if it's a spooky, scary game that lets me use a giant katana on a zombie, we're having a different discussion. But if I'm being honest, I had a wonderful time with this demo because of the parrying. I had a great time timing my combos and figuring out all the different moves, and the moveset for the main character was just simple enough to grasp, and I do hope there's more there. It seemed like there'd be more weapons from what I saw playing on the demo screens. There wasn't any weapons in the demo that I played, but all I had was this katana, and honestly, that was enough for me. Parrying against regular enemies was all fun and games and a great time, but the game really kicked kicks off when you fight a boss. In the demo, you fight against a swordsman of their own right, and it's just a great time to, you know, circle them with your sword, and then they attack you and you parry, and there's all these different things you can do to follow up from the parry. It just felt like a really engaging combat experience, and the game's kind of spooky scary because of all the zombies and the monsters and stuff. I didn't expect this to be my favorite game of PAX West 2025, but I think it was. Now, I'm always on the lookout for great co-op games to not only share with you, but also enjoy with my friends and partners. So it's a good thing that STARSEEKER Astroneer Expeditions was on display on the show floor, and they had a great booth as well. In fact, they were giving out these little name badges that you could actually get your name printed on. I was able to pick this dude's suit, and my name's on it, Dan O'Mac. I thought that was really cool. They printed it on the spot. STARSEEKER Astroneer Expeditions, if it's not obvious, is a spin-off in the Astroneer Now series of games. But where Astroneer is a survival crafting exploration game that you can play with your friends, STARSEEKER Astroneer Expeditions, we're just going to call it STARSEEKER for the purposes of this video, is more of an objectives-based exploration game that you can play with your friends. In the demo that I got to enjoy with Joe, who was one of the developers on the game, shout out to Joe, how you doing? Our goal was to get a radio transceiver to the top of a mountain. So we had to find this thing out in the world together, but luckily we all had our own tools. Now there's a terrain manipulator which allows you to pull from the terrain, literally making a hole with a gun, but each player is also going to have a unique ability as well, one that the other players don't have. I personally had this water gun type thing which allowed me to clean off goo whenever necessary, as well as spray it onto monsters if they were trying to act up. And I think in Joe's case, he had this air ability which allowed him to push things out of the way with a burst of air. There are a few of these abilities, so I'm not too sure if that's the one he had, but regardless, that's how this game's gonna work. You're gonna have your group of friends, and you're all gonna have different abilities to help each other to get the objectives done. So the way it worked is I carried this transponder while Joe paved a way up the mountain for me, and we got there even though there were some monsters and aliens in the way that tried to stop us. Certain things exploded. I'm not too sure what happened, but also the water can be moved around and manipulated. So this world is really malleable. And like I said, it's not a survival game, but there's lots of exploration to be done. So this is obviously going to be a hoot to play with your group of friends. Now, one thing I think I understood about the multiplayer is you can have a 4-player group, but each planet has 16 players per planet. Of course, don't quote me on that. This game is still in development and I played a very early demo of it, so we'll see how things play out, but I think that's how it's supposed to work. Later in the weekend, I played a game called Crimson Desert. Now, let me tell you, this was probably the longest demo I played at PAX West, for better or worse. When I first got there, the people running the booth kept saying, hey, it's a 50-minute demo, it's a 50-minute demo, make sure you're comfortable and you have your water and all that. But when I heard them, I heard 15-minute demo. And my friends and I were like, what's the big deal? It's a 15-minute demo. That's every demo here. What's the problem? And we were just standing and playing. And then eventually, as I played the demo, I would get through an area with a big group of enemies, and then there were fewer enemies, and then there was another big group of enemies again, and I planted the flag, and then there was a cannon area of the game, and then there was a boss, and then there was more stuff after that. So I eventually realized we were there for about an hour, and it hit me like a train. I was like, whoa, that was a lot of time. But it makes sense because this demo is a lot of game. I haven't even talked much about the game. Crimson Desert is an action-adventure game set in an open world where you play as a warrior who can do a lot. This warrior can use the Force, kind of, where they're lifting things with their mind. They have a lot of different sword abilities. They can use just about every weapon. There's all these different combos you can do. It's a lot of video game, so I got a big taste of it while I was there. And it was actually really impressive to see just how much was going on screen, because there's fights happening and you're running through these battlefields, and it's an active battlefield. There's explosions, there's people flying everywhere, people are trying to fight you, and you're on your horse, and all these different unique things can happen. These emergent gameplay moments, as they say, can occur because of all the action that's going on. Not to mention, when you first load into the main area, you can see so far. It's almost like when you're on a plane and you can see out there, but in this case, you're just a dude and you can see out there, and there's lots to see. There's probably lots to do. at least lots to explore. So if you're the kind of player who loves a meaty game with a lot going on, then make sure you keep your eyes on Crimson Desert. Because if video games are a meal, Crimson Desert's gonna be a buffet with another buffet in it. Am I making sense? So I actually had a chance to play through a demo of Pokémon Legends ZA. And before I start, one thing I learned that I found really interesting about Pokémon Legends ZA is the fact that it's called ZA because your trainer rank will be going from Z all the way up to A. And similar to the first Legends game, Legends Arceus, Pokémon Legends ZA is going to be more of an action-based Pokémon game, whereas mainline Pokémon games are turn-based RPGs. Of course, your Pokémon's ability are on cooldowns, just like they would be in any game. You can't just spam Thunderbolt as Pikachu. But there's also things like dodging attacks when you're fighting a boss Pokémon who can damage the player, not just the Pokémon. And you can also sneak up on not only wild Pokemon, but trainers Pokemon as well. So the combat was a little more fleshed out than I was expecting. And in the demo that I played, things were pretty predictable. I enjoyed it, I had a great time with it, but I wasn't extremely surprised, and I think that's a good thing because I really liked Pokemon Legends Arceus, so if they could just do more of that, then I'll be happy. One thing that I really enjoyed about this demo is that at the very end, there's a Pidgeotto that you can fight. It's level 18. So the person running the demo says, hey, I've got an interesting challenge for you if you're willing to take it on. And in my head, I'm like, whatever. This is just like a regular challenge that I'm gonna solve and they're gonna make me feel really cool for doing it, so I'll play along. Cool. There's this level 18 Pidgeotto. Now, the Pokemon you have, I think the highest one was like level 10. I might be being generous there. I can knock out this Pidgeotto, no problem. I've got Mareep, it's an electric sheep. It might be level 10, but type differences are great. Cool. So my Mareep immediately got knocked out. And then I have like a Rattata and a Weedle, like a bug and a rat, and they also got immediately wiped out. I failed the challenge almost instantaneously. It was brutal. Now, shout out to my buddy Curie, who played the demo after I did not know about this challenge until we talked, so they didn't have the heads up on this, right? The way I experienced it was Curie came to me and was like, did you fight the Pidgeotto? And I said, yeah, I lost immediately. And she was like, I killed it. I knocked it right out. I was like, how? The way they did it was by using Weedle to poison the Pidgeotto. Genius, right? So you poison Pidgeotto, and then you just run around and avoid it, keep your Pokemon alive, and you've done it. You've succeeded in the challenge, and Curie figured this out like basically right away. So I wanted to give a quick shout out to them for doing this because I don't think the Pokemon people gave Curie a pin at the end, like a badge for doing the challenge. They should have, right? I don't know. I think it was kind of hard. I didn't figure it out. I've been playing Pokemon my entire life. I should have figured it out. I didn't, but whatever. You know, type differences are still important, okay? Next, I want to talk about an extraction game called Mistfall. Now, if you don't know what an extraction game is, you load into an instance, you fight enemies, you take their loot, and then you try to escape with all your loot intact. The biggest catch here is that there's going to be other people playing this game, other players who are going to also want to grab loot, and they can take your loot from you by force. Usually this game type is not for the weak of heart. If you don't like losing time in play sessions, then extraction games like this are not for you. But in the case of Mistfall Hunters, you've got the extraction game, which is hard and challenging. You want to make sure you get out of there with your loot intact, but there's also the actual combat, which is fairly simple and straightforward. You choose from a handful of classes, but what I enjoyed about this is that each of those classes only has about a handful of abilities. And it was also fun to try to mix up my moveset to figure out what good follow-ups could be used. For example, a shield bash with a sword strike. Whatever made sense, I was starting to learn my character on the spot. And you can also group up with your friends in this game to take on bigger bosses, be more prepared against other players, and ultimately find better loot as a group. But there were some games on display that I didn't get the chance to play on the show floor that I did play at the Mixed, and one of which I want to talk about is called Ambrosia Sky. The best way to think about Ambrosia Sky is that it's one part Breath of the Wild and one part Power Washing Simulator. You use different elements that are fired from this hose that will have different effects on the area. Now, what's really cool about this is you can solve a puzzle in the way that makes the most sense to you. There's not always a prescribed solve to the puzzle. So your solution is based on your logic. Sometimes it'll be a popular solution, but you can come up with any old way that makes sense to you to solve this game's riddles. And I found this really interesting because the entire game is based on cause and effect. If you use this thing on this, it'll have an effect like this. and that effect might have other effects on other things in the area. And while I was talking to the developer Joel on the game, I found that they were really thinking hard about how to see what the player is going to do ahead of time, and also almost leave it open to the player to how are they going to solve this puzzle. And I loved that approach, that it's more about what I'm going to do, not what the developer wants me to do. And of course, like I said, there are some solutions that just make more sense and are more popular, but the big focus of this game is to encourage me to do some creative thinking. And that's fun. That's a great concept to follow through with. And just as in Breath of the Wild, where there are certain puzzles that can be solved in some ridiculous ways, Ambrosia Sky is going to be a lot like that. There's going to be a lot of fun to be had solving these puzzles in ways that might not make sense to someone else, but it doesn't matter because it made sense to you. And I think those kinds of games are really gratifying. This next game is called Rogue Labyrinth, and I think the best way to describe it is that it's an action roguelike with an arena approach. And what I mean by this is that you'll do combat within a room, an arena, clear out all the enemies, and then move on to the next one, which you can choose on a map what kind of room you're going to go into. But the gameplay was really simple, it was fun to play, and as you move through each room, you really are rewarded with things that make your build feel like it's coming together almost right away. It's a very gratifying game. It's not often that roguelikes are immediately fun. Sometimes you have to get good at them first, which is a little counterintuitive, but in Rogue Labyrinth's case, it's straightforward and it's fun. And finally, that brings us to the last game that I actually had a chance to play at PAX West 2025, and that is Resident Evil Requiem, or Resident Evil 9. Matter of fact, I'm not even going to dive too deep into the story elements of the demo. I'm just going to talk about how it works. Now, you can play this game in a third or a first-person fashion. I chose third-person because I'm an old head. I've been playing Resident Evil since PlayStation 1, and I think it's a third-person game. I know Resident Evil 7 was first-person only for a while. I didn't quite understand that, but I get it. It's kind of scary when things are coming at you rather than your character, but if I'm being honest, Resident Evil Requiem had no problem creeping me out. The whole point of the demo was to solve one puzzle. There's one puzzle, obviously lots of different things to explore and find to solve that puzzle, but all of it was to solve one singular puzzle, and I'm sorry, did not do it. But you know who did do it? Curie. Once again, Curie solved this puzzle. Granted, they had to go in a second time to do it, but they were willing to play the game 2 times to solve the puzzle. So I think that speaks to not only Curie's love of Resident Evil, but also tenacity in solving puzzles like this. But in my experience, I got pretty far in the puzzle, but I never looked up. I just had to look up, and then I would have seen more things to find and grab. But all of this is happening while I'm being chased around by this hulking, big, grandma-looking thing. It's got really big eyes, and I think it senses me by smell, or maybe it's got really good night vision. I didn't wait around long enough to figure out this thing's biology. It was just big and scary, and it killed me like 7 times, and I lost. I solved some things in the puzzle, but I didn't solve the whole thing. I did figure out that it hated light. That was cool, but besides that, I was just too focused on survival, which, again, survival horror, Resident Evil kind of invented the genre in a way, so it was great fun. I want to play the full version for sure. I'm excited to play the final version of this game, and maybe this puzzle will be in it, maybe it won't, I'm not sure. So while that was a ton of great games that I enjoyed at PAX West 2025, one thing is going to stick with me from this particular PAX, and that it was my first PAX West. I didn't really think I'd ever have a reason to go to PAX West, but a friend of mine, Curie's partner, suggested, hey, why don't we meet up at PAX West? We'll have a blast, we'll go out for dinner, we'll hang out, we'll play video games, it'll be fun. And it was such a fun experience, hanging out with my friends, connecting with them on a new level, and just learning how much better at video games Curie is than me. Anyway, thank you for letting me talk your ear off about PAX West 2025, all the games, all the friend stuff, and it was a great time. And obviously this upload marks the return of uploading to my channel. I've got more videos planned, and I mean that. I'm not even gonna talk about what they are. You're just gonna see them. You're gonna be like, yep, that's Dan. Dan said he was gonna upload. He's doing it. Look at him go. And you're gonna have to watch it, or you won't. That's your choice, isn't it? And if you did like this video, make sure you like the video. If you really like this video and you want to watch more videos like this, make sure you subscribe to my channel. I always appreciate it. I love it when you guys leave comments just to talk about video games. Hey, if you were at PAX West this year, let me know what you enjoyed. Let me know what games you're playing. What have you been playing this summer? What are you going to play going into the fall? And I'll see you in the next video. See ya.